The night was cruel, colder than anything a human should face alone. Snow fell from the sky in heavy sheets, covering the ground in endless white. The wind howled like a beast, cutting through skin and bone, yet the man kept walking, each step sinking into the frozen ground. His breath came out in clouds, his boots cracked ice beneath him. He was tired, but he could not stop, not in this storm. If he stopped, he knew the snow would bury him, and that would be the end. Then, something strange reached his ears, not the sound of the storm, not the growl of some frozen beast. It was softer, weaker, almost a whisper, a voice or maybe two voices crying out in the wind. The man froze in his tracks, his heart pounding. He told himself it might be a trick, an echo, even his mind breaking from the cold. But the sound came again, thin and desperate. Voices that were fighting to stay alive. He turned, scanning the white around him. The snow swirled, making it hard to see. But then, shadows. Two small figures, curled up together in the drift. They were shaking, their bodies covered in frost. Alien shapes, fragile and strange, yet painfully human in their suffering. The man's breath caught, because their eyes opened when he came near. They glowed faintly in the dark, a soft blue light that pierced the storm. He knew then, these were not humans. They were something else. Two alien sisters, left to freeze in the snow. The man knelt beside them, brushing ice from their faces. Their lips were pale, their hands thin and trembling. They tried to speak, but only a broken whisper came. He leaned closer, straining to hear. One word, a name, then another voice, another name. They were alive, but only barely. If he left them, they would die within minutes. If he helped them, he would risk his own life, carrying more weight through the storm. His mind told him to walk away, to save himself. But his heart could not. He shrugged off his cloak, wrapping it around both sisters. The cold bit into his skin at once, but he did not care. He lifted them with strong arms, one on each side, their small bodies clinging to him weakly. They were lighter than he expected, bones and skin, almost like shadows. Still they pressed their faces into his chest, as if trying to steal his warmth. The man staggered under the weight, but he set his jaw and pushed forward. The storm was merciless, snow piling high, wind screaming louder, but he would not let go. Every step became harder, every breath sharper, yet he kept his eyes forward, searching for shelter. Finally, through the blur of snow, he spotted the outline of rocks. A small rise, a dark gap, a cave. He dragged himself toward it, half falling, half crawling. Inside, the wind died down, and for the first time he could breathe. He laid the sisters gently on the ground, their skin still icy to the touch. He built a small fire, his hands shaking, sparks catching, flames rising. Warmth spread through the cave, slow but steady. The sisters stirred, their glowing eyes opening once more. They looked at him, confused, afraid, yet filled with hope. The man sat near them, breathing hard, watching the fire. He knew nothing about them, who they were, why they had been left to die. But as the flames flickered and their bodies stopped shaking, he realized one truth. From this moment, their lives were tied to his. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, something new had begun. The fire crackled inside the cave, sending sparks into the dark. The human sat close, rubbing his frozen hands together, his breath heavy. Beside him, the two alien sisters slowly began to stir, their thin bodies wrapped tightly in his cloak. At first they only shivered, their lips trembling, their skin pale like carved ice. But then one of them opened her eyes, glowing faintly blue in the firelight. The other followed, weak but alive, and both stared at him in silence. For a moment he did not move. He feared they might panic, cry out, or attack him. They were aliens after all, strangers in a cruel world, but instead they only pressed closer together, their eyes filled with fear. The man took a slow breath, holding out his hands toward the flames. "Stay warm," he whispered softly. Though he knew they might not understand his words, yet they watched him, eyes blinking, as if they felt the kindness behind his voice. The sisters tried to speak, their voices so faint he had to lean close. The first one whispered something that sounded like a name, her own name perhaps. The second followed with another word, weak but steady. He repeated the sounds, careful not to break them. The sisters blinked, surprised that a human would try to say their names. For the first time, he saw a flicker of trust in their eyes. He fed the fire with dry wood from his pack. The warmth spread slowly, turning their trembling into soft sighs. The man took out a small piece of dried food, breaking it in half. He offered it to them, his hands gentle. They hesitated, glancing at each other, then at him. Finally, with shaking fingers, the older sister reached out and took it. She broke it again, giving half to her younger sibling. Both chewed slowly, their weak bodies fighting to hold strength. The human watched, feeling something heavy in his chest. These were not just two strangers left in the snow. They were children of someone, sisters abandoned by their people. But why, he wondered? Who could leave them to die in the storm? His mind circled with questions, but he stayed silent. All that mattered now was keeping them alive. When the food was gone, the younger sister leaned against his arm, her eyes half closed, her breathing softer. The older one looked at him for a long time before resting her head on his shoulder. The human froze, unsure of what to do. But he let them rest, wrapping the cloak tighter around all three of them. The fire burned low, the storm howled outside. Inside the cave, though, there was warmth, fragile but real. Hours passed like that, silence broken only by the wind and the crackle of flames. The man could not sleep. He kept listening to their breathing. Every rise and fall was proof that they were still alive. In the middle of the night, the older sister stirred, her voice faint. She spoke again, this time longer, a string of soft words he could not understand. Her hand touched his chest, weak but deliberate. Her glowing eyes held his, filled with something deeper than fear. A plea, maybe a promise. He could not be sure. The younger sister shifted, her small hand curling around his arm. They clung to him as if he were their only anchor in this cold world, and perhaps he was. The man stared into the fire, feeling the weight of their trust. He had not asked for this. He had not planned to carry two alien lives in his arms, but now it was too late to turn away. They needed him, and somehow, he felt he needed them too. The storm outside raged without mercy. But inside the cave, the bond of survival had begun. What started as rescue was turning into something more, something none of them could yet understand. Morning came slowly, the storm outside still heavy, but inside the cave the fire burned low. The human stirred awake, his back sore from the hard ground. He looked down and found the two alien sisters still pressed against him, wrapped in his cloak. Their glowing eyes blinked open at the same time, faint blue light shining in the shadows. For a moment, they only watched him, silent and unreadable. Then the older one whispered a word, her voice hoarse but clearer than before. The man leaned closer, repeating the strange sound carefully. She nodded, pointing at herself, her lips forming the same word again. It was her name. The younger sister followed, giving her own name with a small, fragile smile. The man repeated both, clumsy on his tongue but honest in his effort. The sisters exchanged a look, almost surprised that a human tried to say their names. Something softened in their faces, a crack in the wall of fear. They began to whisper together, their voices low. It sounded like they were arguing in their own language. Finally, the older one turned back to him, her hands shaking as she tried to form words in his tongue. Not all came through, but enough. She spoke of their people, of a tribe that lived in the frozen valleys, a tribe that had rules older than memory. The weak, the sick, the unwanted were cast out, left in the snow to die. Her voice broke, her eyes burning with shame and anger. The human listened, his jaw tightening. So this was why they were in the storm, abandoned by their own. The younger sister added a few words, her voice trembling. She pulled her thin scarf aside, revealing faint marks across her arm, strange symbols, cut into her skin by blades, a mark of exile. The man's fists clenched, anger burning through his cold. He could not understand how anyone could do this. To leave two young lives to freeze in the snow. The sisters huddled close, tears freezing on their cheeks. But then, slowly, the older one lifted her head. Her glowing eyes met his, strong now, determined. She whispered another word, soft but sharp. The man tilted his head, unsure, so she repeated it, tapping her chest, then pointing to him. It took him a moment to understand. She was calling him something. Protector, savior, maybe more. The younger sister nodded eagerly, speaking in a rush of words he could not follow, but the tone was clear. They saw him not just as the man who saved them from the snow, but as something greater. His throat tightened, unsure of what this meant. He was only a traveler, a wanderer in a world not his own, yet in their eyes, he was hope itself. The fire crackled louder as if answering the silence. The human leaned back, running a hand across his face. The weight of their secret pressed against him. If their tribe had cast them out, they would not stop. Hunters would come. The sisters had warned him in broken words. Once marked for exile, they could never return. But they carried something their people feared. Knowledge, the older one whispered. A truth hidden in their blood. A truth that made them dangerous. The man's heart pounded at her words. He wanted to ask more, but her strength was fading. She pressed a hand to her chest, her voice falling to a whisper. Danger, she breathed, then pointed outside into the storm. He followed her gaze, listening. For a long moment there was nothing but the howl of wind. But then, a sound, faint but real, distant steps crunching through the snow. The sisters froze, their eyes wide, their bodies tense. The human reached for his blade, the truth heavy in his mind. Their secret was not just sorrow, it was a warning. They had been left to die, but someone was not done with them yet. The storm was not the only threat outside that cave. The cave was quiet except for the low crackle of fire, but the human's heart was not quiet, it was pounding like a drum. The sister's warning echoed in his mind. Danger, she had whispered, pointing into the storm. He listened, holding his breath, and there it was again, the faint crunch of footsteps on frozen snow. Someone was out there, moving closer, step by step. The storm was thick, but not enough to hide those who were hunting. The man looked at the sisters, their glowing eyes wide with fear. The older one gripped his arm, her thin fingers pressing into his skin. Her lips formed broken words, half in her tongue, half in his. Not safe they come, she whispered, trembling. The younger sister buried her face against his side, her body shaking. It was clear they trusted him more than anyone, maybe more than they should. He stared at the fire, his mind caught between choices. He could leave them here, slip away into the storm, save his own life. They were strangers, alien girls cast out by their tribe. Why should he risk everything for them? But the memory of the night before burned in him, their frail bodies shivering in his arms, their glowing eyes begging him not to let go. He knew the truth already. He could not abandon them, not now, not ever. He stoked the fire quickly, building the flames higher. The warmth spread through the cave, giving the sisters a little more strength. Then he pulled out his blade, steel glinting in the light. It was a poor weapon against many, but it was all he had. The sisters watched him with wide eyes, their lips moving in prayer-like whispers. He turned to them, his voice calm but firm. "Stay behind me," he said. Even if they understood only half his words, they understood his tone. The crunching outside grew louder, closer. Shadows moved at the edge of the snow, tall figures with glowing eyes like the sisters, but sharper older hunters. The older sister clutched his cloak, whispering something fast in her own tongue. She pointed to the marks on her arm, then to the approaching shadows. They were the same tribe, the ones who had carved her skin and left her to die. Now they had returned to finish what the storm had failed to do. The man felt the weight of the choice crushing down on him. He could fight, but it meant revealing himself, drawing their wrath. He could run, but the sisters would never survive without him. He could hide, but sooner or later they would be found. His jaw tightened, his grip on the blade strong. There was no real choice at all. He would protect them, no matter the cost. The sisters seemed to sense his decision. The younger one pressed her forehead against his arm, whispering his name, or something close to it. The older sister raised her glowing eyes to his, fierce despite her weakness. She spoke a word in her tongue that he did not know, but the meaning was clear. She was naming him something sacred, something more than protector. He did not understand their culture, their secret traditions, but he understood the look in their eyes. They had chosen him, and in return he chose them. The shadows outside moved nearer, the storm swirling around them. The man pulled the sisters deeper into the cave, hiding them behind the rocks. He stepped forward, blade in hand, firelight casting his shadow long on the walls. His breath came out in clouds, steady and strong. He knew the hunters were out there, waiting to strike, but he was ready, not for himself, but for the two fragile lives that now depended on him. The storm roared, the fire cracked, the hunters closed in, and the man stood firm, his choice clear, his fate sealed. Whatever came through the snow, he would face it, because he had made a promise without words, a promise to two alien sisters who had nothing left. But him, the first shadow broke through the storm, tall and wrapped in fur, glowing eyes like frozen fire. The human raised his blade, steady though fear pressed heavy on his chest. Behind him the sisters clung to his cloak, their eyes wide with terror. The hunters had come, not to take them back, but to finish the exile. A harsh voice cut through the wind, cold and cruel. The older sister whispered, "They say, leave us, human, and live. They say, we are nothing." His jaw clenched, his grip tightened. He would not abandon them. The hunters moved closer, their weapons glinting in the storm. The human pulled the sisters to their feet. "Stay close," he said. They ran through a narrow tunnel, snow falling from above, hunters rushing behind. Every step was pain, but stopping meant death. The tunnel opened to a valley of endless white. The hunters poured out like wolves, their cries sharp in the storm. The man dragged the sisters toward a slope of rocks, sliding down into the snow. He hid them behind a boulder, chest heaving, their glowing eyes fixed on him, but the hunters spread out, closing in. The younger sister pointed toward a dark ridge of trees, their only chance. The man nodded, waiting, then pulled them up. They ran, the storm cutting their faces, the hunters roaring behind. The trees loomed nearer, shadows thick and dark, but the hunters were faster, blades flashing. The man turned, his blade striking steel, sparks flying. The sisters screamed his name. The chase had reached its peak, and only courage or blood would decide who survived. The wind screamed across the valley, snow whipping in every direction. The human's blade clashed against the hunter's weapon, sparks flashing bright against the dark storm. The sisters gasped behind him, their glowing eyes wide, their fragile hands clinging to each other. The hunters spread out in a half circle, their voices sharp, cruel, echoing through the night. They were trained killers, stronger, faster, and this was their land. Yet the man stood tall, his boots planted firm in the snow, his blade steady in his hand. The first hunter lunged again, a spear thrusting forward like a snake. The man twisted aside, his blade slashing across the wooden shaft, breaking it in half. The hunter snarled, stumbling back, but two more surged forward. The human blocked one strike, then another, the force sending pain through his arm. His breath came fast, each inhale burning cold, each exhale clouding the air. But he did not fall. He refused to fall. The sisters crouched low, whispering in their own tongue. Their voices were trembling but filled with desperate hope. They had seen men die under these hunters before, but not this man, not yet. The older sister pressed her glowing hand to the ground, as if praying to the frozen earth itself. The younger one clutched the cloak he had wrapped around them, refusing to let it slip away. Their entire world now hung on his blade. Another hunter charged, swinging a curved blade. The human ducked, snow spraying as steel cut through the air where his head had been. He drove his shoulder forward, slamming into the hunter's chest. The alien stumbled back, shocked that a human dared to fight so directly. The man's blade flashed again, striking the hunter's leg, dropping him into the snow. The others hesitated for just a moment, surprised by his strength. That pause gave him breath, but only a breath. They regrouped, their glowing eyes near. Rowing, circling him like wolves. One hissed words in their language. The older sister translated quickly. "They say, he must die slowly," she whispered, her voice cracking. The man's jaw tightened, his blade raised again. If slow death was their plan, then they would have to earn it. They attacked together, 3 blades at once. The human blocked the first, twisted under the second, but the third sliced across his arm. Blood sprayed against the snow, red against endless white. The sisters cried out, their voices sharp with terror, but the man did not falter. His blade snapped upward, striking one across the chest. The alien hunter fell back with a scream, clutching the wound. His muscles burned, pain flaring in his arm, but his eyes never left the enemy. The hunters glanced at each other, uneasy now. This human was not like others they had faced. He bled, he staggered, but he fought like fire itself, refusing to die. The older sister whispered something fast, her hand gripping his cloak. "You fight like storm," she breathed, awe in her trembling voice. The younger one tugged at her arm, pointing toward the ridge. The trees loomed closer now, shadows that could hide them if only they could reach. The man understood without words. They could not win this battle, not against so many, but they could escape, and that was enough. He slashed once more, forcing the hunters back with raw fury. Then he grabbed the sisters, pulling them to their feet, shouting with all the strength he had left. They ran again, stumbling through snow, his blood marking their trail. Behind them the hunters roared, furious, voices rising like thunder. But the man did not look back, his body a wall of pain, his mind a wall of fire. The sisters held to him, half dragged, half carried. The storm swallowed their cries, but their eyes shone bright with something new. Not just fear, not just desperation, but belief. Belief that this human, bleeding and battered, might truly be the one who could defy death itself. The trees swallowed them at last, tall and dark, branches bending under the weight of ice and snow. The human dragged the sisters deeper into the forest, his arm bleeding, his breath sharp and heavy. Behind them, the hunters' voices echoed, distant but still chasing, never stopping. The storm covered their trail for a time, but he knew it would not hide them forever. Still, every step into the woods gave him a little more hope, a little more time. The sisters clung to him, their small bodies weak but unwilling to let go. The younger one pressed her head against his side, whispering his name again and again, broken but clear. The older one stayed close, her glowing eyes studying his face even as fear trembled inside her. They did not see a stranger now, not just a human who stumbled into their lives. They saw something more, and the man could feel it, heavy as the storm itself. They reached a hollow between the trees where the wind was softer. He lowered the sisters gently to the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. The blood from his wounds stained the snow, but he forced himself to stay awake. The sisters looked at the red color spreading and gasped, their glowing eyes wide with shock. The younger one reached for his arm, her fingers brushing the wound. The older one whispered something in their language, sharp and pained. He did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They were not just afraid for themselves anymore, they were afraid for him. The human tore a strip of cloth from his shirt, binding the wound as best he could. The sisters watched, then leaned closer, their glowing hands hovering over the cut. A faint warmth spread from their touch, not enough to heal, but enough to ease the pain. He looked at them in surprise, but they only lowered their eyes, shy and quiet. It was their way of saying thank you, even if no words were spoken. Still, and stretched between them, broken only by the storm outside the trees. Finally, the older sister spoke, her voice soft but steady. She pointed at him, then pressed her hand against her chest. Her words came broken, but the meaning was strong. Saved us. You are bound. The younger sister nodded quickly, repeating the word bound again, her voice filled with childlike certainty. The man frowned, unsure, but they both leaned closer, their glowing eyes locked on his. In their culture, saving someone's life was not just kindness, it was destiny. A bond stronger than law, stronger than blood. The human felt their hands grip his tightly, their small fingers refusing to let go. He tried to explain, to tell them he was only helping, that he did not belong to their world, but their faces were set, their voices insistent. You are ours, the older one whispered in broken human tongue, her cheeks burning faint blue. The younger one nodded, pressing her forehead against his arm. They were not just clinging for warmth, not just clinging for safety. They were claiming him as protector, as family, maybe even more. His chest tightened, torn between fear and something else. He had been alone for so long, wandering the cold with no one waiting for him anywhere. And now, these two fragile lives were pressing against him, calling him theirs. He looked into their eyes, saw the trust, the hope, the fragile spark of something deeper. A bond had been made, not by choice, but by fire, blood, and storm. He realized then that he could never walk away. Even if hunters came, even if death itself followed, he would not abandon them. The forest grew darker, the storm raging above. The sisters rested against him, their breathing calm, their hearts steady. He listened to the sound, letting it anchor him in the cold. The bond was real now, unspoken but unbreakable, and though danger waited bay, on the trees for the first time since the storm began, he felt something warm in his chest. Not just duty, not just survival, but belonging. The forest was quiet for a short while, only the sound of snow dripping from branches. The human sat with the sisters close against him, their small bodies warmed by the fire he had built in the hollow. But he knew the hunters were still out there, searching, circling like wolves in the storm. The sisters knew it too, their glowing eyes darting to every sound beyond the trees. There was no safety here, not for long. When the fire died to embers, he rose, his body sore, his arm still bleeding under the cloth. The sisters stood as well, holding on to each other, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for direction. He studied the forest, the paths twisting through ice and shadows. One way led deeper into the frozen woods, another led toward the mountains. But it was the youngest who tugged his cloak and pointed upward, her small voice whispering, "Safe, high ground." He nodded, understanding. The mountains would be harder to climb, but the hunters would find it harder too. The older sister whispered something sharp in their own tongue, warning of danger. But she still followed as he led them, his blade in hand, every step sinking into snow. The wind cut through the trees, branches groaning under weight, yet the storm gave them cover, hiding their tracks from glowing eyes behind them. Hours passed as they climbed, every muscle burning, every breath sharp in the frozen air. The sisters stumbled often, their bodies weak, but the man carried them when he could, one on his back, one in his arms, never letting them fall. They whispered to him in soft voices, words he did not always understand, but their tone carried thanks, trust, and something more. A warmth he had not felt in years. Then, a sound broke the climb, distant but growing louder. The horn of the hunters, a low cry echoing through the valleys. The sisters froze, clutching him, their faces pale with fear. "They follow." The older one whispered, her voice breaking. The man's eyes narrowed, scanning the ridge above. They had to move faster or be caught in the open. Snow shifted underfoot, rocks loose with ice. At one point the younger sister slipped, nearly falling into a gap. The man grabbed her in time, pulling her close, his breath heavy with relief. She looked up at him with wide, glowing eyes, whispering his name, not just in fear, but in something deeper, as if binding her life to his in that single breath. The hunters' voices grew nearer, footsteps crunching, weapons clattering. The man pressed the sisters against the rock wall, signaling them to stay silent. He crouched low, watching shadows move below through the trees. They passed close, their eyes glowing like cold stars in the snow. The sisters held their breath, their small hands clutching his arm tight. One wrong sound and they would be found. Minutes stretched like hours, but at last the hunters moved on, their voices fading into the storm. The man let out a long breath, pulling the sisters onward. Higher they climbed, until the ridge opened to a narrow ledge. From there they could see far across the valley, endless snow glowing under the pale moon. The sisters gasped softly, both pressing close to him. For the first time since their exile, they saw something beautiful instead of cruel. But beauty did not mean safety. The man's eyes scanned the horizon, and in the distance he saw faint lights moving through the snow. The hunters were not giving up, they were spreading wider, searching every shadow. The sisters followed his gaze, their fear returning. The older one spoke softly, her hand gripping his tightly. "Together, we escape." The human looked at them, their glowing eyes filled with hope and fear. He nodded, pulling them close. Escape was not just running anymore. It was survival. It was family. It was the bond that they had chosen, and no matter how many hunters came, he would carry them through the storm. The escape was only beginning, but they would face it together. The night deepened as they rested on the ridge, the pale moon shining weakly through the storm. The man had built a small fire in a hollow between stones, shielding the sisters from the cold wind. They huddled close beside him, wrapped in his cloak, their glowing eyes reflecting the flames. For the first time since the storm began, there was silence. No footsteps, no horns, only the crackle of fire and the beating of 3 hearts. The human sat with his blade across his knees, his eyes scanning the shadows. The sisters leaned against him, their fragile bodies pressed close for warmth. The younger one was the first to speak, her voice soft and trembling. She whispered his name, broken but clear, her glowing eyes staring at him as if he was the only light in the world. He looked down, unsure, but she pressed her hand to his chest, her small fingers clutching his shirt. "Life, you gave," she whispered, her words simple but heavy. The older sister's gaze followed, her lips parting, her voice shaking with something unspoken. He tried to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. He had saved them, yes, but he had not expected what followed. He was only a traveler, a man wandering a world not his own, Yet in their eyes, he was more than that, something greater, something he could not name. The older sister reached out, her hand brushing his wounded arm gently. Her touch was warm despite the cold, her voice low. "You fight, bleed for us," she said, her broken words stronger than before, her glowing eyes locked on his, and for a moment the storm outside faded. Only the three of them existed in the circle of firelight. The younger sister leaned closer, whispering in their own tongue. The older one listened, then spoke again, her voice trembling as if she carried a great weight. "In our people, when life is saved, a bond is made," she said slowly, her hand pressed against her heart, then against his. "You are chosen." The human froze, staring at them, the meaning sinking in like ice and fire at once. Chosen, not just protector, not just savior, but something more. He shook his head, trying to explain, trying to tell them he was not of their kind, but they leaned closer, refusing to let go. The younger one whispered quickly, her cheeks glowing faint blue, "You are ours." The fire popped, sparks dancing in the dark. The man looked between them, his chest heavy with confusion, fear, and something else. They were so fragile, so innocent, yet their words carried power, a confession, not only of gratitude but of claim. They did not just want him as protector, they wanted him as mate, as family, as bond. He swallowed hard, the storm howling beyond the ridge. His life had been one of wandering, of loneliness. Never had anyone looked at him with such trust, such desperate need. And now, two pairs of glowing eyes were fixed on him, waiting, pleading. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of their confession. The older sister's hand rose to his cheek, her touch soft, her eyes fierce. She whispered a final word, a word that burned even in her broken human tongue. "Love." The younger sister echoed it, her voice higher, filled with trembling hope. Both pressed against him, holding him as if he was their only world. The human closed his eyes, breathing deep. He did not know if he could give them what they asked. But he knew one truth. He could never abandon them. Not after this. The bond had become more than survival, more than duty. It had become something that could change all their lives forever. The storm had calmed by morning, though the land was still buried in white. The human stood at the edge of the ridge, his blade in hand, his eyes scanning the valley below. The hunters were there, dark figures moving like shadows across the snow. They had not given up. They would never give up. The sisters joined him, their glowing eyes filled with both fear and determination. They had confessed their bond, their hearts, and now their future rested in his hands. The human tightened his grip on the blade, his arm aching but steady. He turned to the sisters, their small forms wrapped in his cloak, their faces pale but strong. "You stay behind me," he said firmly, though his voice was softer than before. They nodded, their trust absolute, their belief unshaken. It was no longer about surviving one night, it was about surviving all the nights to come. The hunters began to climb, their voices carrying cruel words through the frozen air. The older sister translated in a whisper. "They say we belong to death. They say you will join us in snow." The man's jaw tightened, his heart burning with anger. He had heard enough. He would not allow their fate to be written by cruelty. The hunters reached the ridge, their glowing eyes sharp, their blades raised. The human stepped forward, his body a shield, his breath steady despite the storm in his veins. The first strike came fast, steel against steel, sparks flying. The man roared, his blade clashing, his boots grinding into the snow. The sisters screamed his name, their voices filled with both fear and hope. He fought like a storm itself, striking, blocking, refusing to fall. Blood ran from his wound, but his eyes never left the enemy. Each strike was not for himself, but for the two lives behind him. The hunters pressed harder, their numbers greater, their strength sharp, but the man did not step back. Not once. The sisters said close together, their glowing hands raised, whispering words in their tongue. The air around them shimmered faintly, a strange light pulsing. It was not strong, not a weapon, but it gave the man strength, as if their bond had become his shield. With a final cry, he drove his blade forward, striking one hunter down. The others faltered, their eyes narrowing. They had expected him to break, to fall like any other, But this human had defied the storm, defied blood, defied fate itself, and behind him stood two who would not abandon him, no matter the cost. The hunters retreated, their voices fading into the snow. They would return, the sisters warned him with trembling words. But not today, not this dawn. Today they had survived, together. The human sank to his knees, exhausted, the blade heavy in his hand. The sisters rushed to his side, their small arms wrapping around him. Tears froze on their cheeks as they whispered his name. "You saved us," the older one said, her voice soft but unshaken. "You are ours," the younger one added, pressing her forehead to his chest. He looked at them, his breath ragged, his body broken, but his spirit unyielding. They had given him something he never thought he would find. Not just purpose, not just survival, but belonging. The storm would return, the hunters would return, but he was no longer alone. He had chosen them, and they had chosen him. Together they would face the future, no matter what came through the snow. The world beyond the storm whispered of danger, of trials yet to come. But in that moment, as the fire burned low and two alien sisters clung to him with trust and love, the human knew one truth. The future was theirs, bound not by blood, not by law, but by a bond forged in storm and fire. And nothing in the universe could break it.